Hello AP students, this is Mrs. Camp and I am here to start you off with your first set of rhetorical devices. Each week I'll bring you approximately 10 rhetorical devices. I'll explain them to you. You can watch this video as often as you like and you need to learn them each week. And then each week we'll have a quiz on the 10 rhetorical devices plus whatever we've learned in the past. So the first quiz will just be on these 10, but they will add up at the end and be cumulative because you need to know all these words and know how to use them correctly. So let's start with our first 10. Okay, let's begin with rhetoric. You know this word already. We've already talked about it a little bit, but rhetoric is the study of how writers use language to manipulate the audience, to get the audience to respond as the writer intends. It's the study of effective, persuasive language. And everything we're doing this year in AP English is the study of rhetoric. We're going to look at how writers craft their language to get you to respond in the way they want to. And in order to understand rhetoric, you must also understand audience, our second word. The audience is the specific group for which a text is intended, the readers or hearers of a message. And when we're studying nonfiction like we are this year, you will see that the audience is a little more specific than it is for fiction or poetry. Especially when we examine speeches or historical documents, you'll see that there is a very specific audience in mind. And knowing the audience is key to being an effective rhetorician. Knowing critical information about your audience, like who they are and what they value and what will persuade them, is going to be key to understanding how to become a better persuader. Number 3 is close reading. That's what we've been engaging in all year so far too. Close reading is carefully examining a text by being attentive to organization, figurative language, sentence structure, vocabulary, and other literary and structural elements of a text. Now, when we do close reading, you're going to hear me say think small. You look at small passages. You look at individual sentences to see how the writer crafts his text. And in order to do close reading, we must engage in annotation, our fourth word. Annotation is critical or explanatory notes added to a text. And basically it means taking notes on the text as one reads it. So as you read, making marks on the text is annotation. When you see something that surprises you, you mark it. When you see something that confuses you, you mark it. When you see a unique word choice, when you see a unique sentence structure, you mark it. Anytime you pause and think, mark it, because it's something that the writer's doing to create an effect. Now, we'll analyze it later, but the first step is just marking, annotating. Then, when we do rhetorical analysis, we must look at the context of the piece. And the context is the historical, social, political, and or religious situation that impacts, influences, affects a writer's choices, message, methods, etc. What this means is, when we're looking at a piece of nonfiction, we have to look at when it was written, who's writing it, who is the audience, what's the political situation at the time, what's the affiliations of the audience, how's the audience going to respond, are they angry to begin with, are they open to the ideas that the writer's presenting before the writer begins. All of this is important to rhetorical analysis. So this is where your history is going to come in. We're going to be doing a good bit of history. And the context is the situation in which the text is presented. And the text, our number 6 word, text are any cultural products that can be read and investigated. They are both visual and written messages. So we're going to look at advertising. We're going to look at editorial cartoons. We're going to look at videos. All of that is a text, and you need to be able to analyze the devices the creator uses to portray a message, to persuade an audience. You should be pretty familiar with number 7 now, diction. Diction is the author's choice of words. And when we examine diction, what we do is we look at why the writer chooses one word in favor or instead of another word. We look at what the impact of that word choice is based on the connotations of that word, how the connotations shape our feelings, and why the writer would want us to feel that way. And again, you should be more familiar now with syntax. Syntax is the arrangement of words into sentences. It's a sentence structure, how a sentence is composed grammatically. And we've begun working on syntax, how we analyze the way sentences are broken down, because the way we read a sentence affects the way we interpret the information. And so these next few rhetorical devices are going to deal with syntax, how sentences are put together. So that leads us to number 9, independent clause. Independent clause is going to be the main clause. It is a complete sentence with a subject and a verb. And sometimes in a sentence you may have more than one independent clause. But what's important to know is that it has a subject and a verb, and it can stand alone as a complete sentence. If you were to take it out of a compound sentence, it would make sense by itself and stand alone. Here are some examples of independent clauses. The dog barked last night. Subject, dog, verb, barked. That's a simple sentence. The dog and the cat fight often. That is an independent clause and a simple sentence as well. Your subject is dog and cat. The verb is fight. The dog and the cat fight often and then play together. That is an independent clause. It is also a simple sentence. Our subject is dog and cat. The verb is fight and play. We have a compound subject and a compound verb, but it is still a simple sentence. Then we move to dependent clause, number 10. The dependent clause is also known as the subordinate clause. It's subordinate and dependent because it depends on an independent clause. It can't stand alone. It has to connect to an independent clause. And a subordinate clause is a phrase that contains both the subject and the verb, and possibly more than one of each, but it cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. Often, but not always, it's marked off by commas from the main clause. Here are some examples of dependent clauses. Unless the rain stops soon, after we leave school, or who is ready to paint. So for instance, with that first one, we might use a sentence such as, we will have to cancel the game unless the rain stops soon. We will have to cancel the game is your independent clause. It can stand alone. Unless the rain stops soon, cannot, because of that unless at the beginning of the clause. Okay, so let's look at some examples and a little bit more in depth with independent and dependent clauses. I have a couple of sentences here. Let's look at this first one. Gaffney High School is a great school, but it has room for improvement too. Gaffney High School is a great school is an independent clause. It's a complete sentence. It can stand alone. It has room for improvement too is a complete sentence or an independent clause. It can stand alone. We've put them in one sentence and we've joined them with a comma and a conjunction. But is one of our fanboys. Remember that fanboys are your coordinating conjunction. Stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So this would be a compound sentence. After school is over today is a dependent clause. It cannot stand alone, but it has a subject and a verb. School is. I am going to my friend's house is an independent clause. It can stand alone. This makes this a complex sentence, a dependent clause and an independent clause. I enjoy reading this book, independent clause. It has such compelling and interesting characters, independent clause. Joined by the semicolon, this is a compound sentence. When I grow up is a dependent clause. It has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone. I plan on starting my own business, independent clause. It can stand alone. I don't know, independent clause. It can stand alone. If Gaffney is the place for my business, dependent clause. It has a subject and a verb, but it cannot stand alone because of if. But is my coordinating conjunction. So I join the two complete sentences with a comma and a coordinating conjunction. This is a compound complex sentence because it has dependent clauses and independent clauses, more than one of each. So now, remember that you need to study these 10 terms. You will have a quiz on these 10 terms on Thursday, September 24th. We'll do it on QuizStar. It'll be a quick, timed quiz. You will have some definitions and maybe a few examples. Next week, I will add 10 more, and your quiz will be on all 20, but we'll do 10 at a time. Have fun. If you have questions, ask me in class. Bye.